Following the Second World War, there were a number of war crimes trials held to bring the perpetrators of crimes against humanity and other atrocities to justice. The most high-profile trials were the Nuremberg trials, held to bring those remaining members of the Nazi government and hierarchy to justice. The most senior figures to stand trial were Hermann Goring, Rudolf Hess and Joachim von Ribbentrop, but amongst these men were those members of Hitler's inner circle and friends who were key to the war effort and also the Nazi regime. One of those who was not there was a man who had been indicted of crimes and who was supposed to be at the trials, sitting amongst Goring and Hess as a war criminal. But Robert Lai would never get to trial. But his crimes were huge. He was accused of crimes against humanity and war crimes, but his death sentence would be a missing one. So join us today as we look at the missing execution of Robert Lai, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Robert Lai was the head of the German Labour Front from 1933 to the end of the Second World War, and it was for his involvement in this group that it was hoped he would be brought to trial. But who was he? He was born the 7th of 11 children and was a soldier during the First World War. He served as a voluntary soldier and spent 2 years involved in artillery training, and also served as an aerial artillery spotter. His job was to be in the skies spotting artillery for the Germans to then target, but during one flight in July 1917, his aircraft was shot down over France and he was taken a prisoner of war. It's considered that he suffered a brain injury in the crash, and he spoke afterwards with a serious stammer and was also prone to erratic behaviour, made worse through his drinking. But he then returned to Germany after the war and studied at university, before he joined the Nazi Party after reading Hitler's speech after the Beer Hall Putsch. Hitler's ideas appealed to Lai, and he became incredibly devoted to him. Hitler also enjoyed speaking with Lai, and Hitler put up with his drinking, arrogance and also incompetence at times, but Lai always sided with Hitler in disputes with other Nazis. He attracted a reputation of being a terrible drunk, but after the party was re-established after being outlawed, he was named a deputy Gauleiter of the southern Rhineland, before becoming the Gauleiter. He was also involved in the editing of the anti-Semitic newspaper Der Westdeutscher Beobachter in Cologne, which produced anti-Semitic images and slander against Jews, peddling the policies and beliefs of the Nazis. He continued as a Gauleiter and remained in favour of Hitler. On the 2nd of June 1933, he became elevated to the Reichsleiter, the second highest political rank inside the Nazi Party, but Hitler would have other plans for him. Hitler decided to take over the trade union movement to bring them under the power of his party, and on the 10th of May 1933, Lai was appointed as the head of the newly founded German Labour Front, known as the DAF, or the Deutscher Arbeitersfront. The DAF assumed power over the trade unions, and Lai was seen as a poor leader as he had no experience in this field. Purges secured Lai's position, and as the head of the Labour Front, he was involved in the actions of the organisation. Hitler insisted that wages of German workers must remain low, and that hours should remain the same, and to compensate for this, the DAF worked to provide workers with leisure and entertainment opportunities. Lai and the DAF established the Strength Through Joy programme, which was aimed to suppress the risk of the working class discontent. This was to provide workers with a range of benefits and opportunities, such as subsidised holidays across Germany and in countries deemed safe or allies of the Nazis. Here workers would go on holiday, in a sense as a perk of working. There were other opportunities such as trips to the opera or to visit concerts, as well as free education and coaching in sports teams. All of this was paid by the DAF, costing around 29 million Reichsmarks a year, but it was one of the most popular programmes of the Nazi regime and helped to win over the working classes. They also created the people's car, the Volkswagen, and the German car industry failed to meet the demand set by Hitler for the Volkswagen car to be sold at 1,000 Reichsmarks or less. Because of this, it was taken over as a project by the DAF, and now working for the DAF, Porsche built a new factory, and the cars were sold to German workers based on instalment plans. The DAF had a huge number of employees working for them, but as the Second World War broke out, Lai's importance did decline. The most important thing for workers now was to engage with the state of total war, and that everything made would go towards winning the war. The militarisation of the workforce led to the importance of the DAF and the strength through joy programs declining. During the time of War II, Lie's drunk behaviour was less tolerated, and he was in a sense superseded in his power by Fritz Todt and Albert Speer, the men who headed up the German workforce of Operation Todt. German workers were conscripted into the war, and foreign workers were brought in to replace them, but Lie was deeply involved in the mistreatment and use of foreign slave workers. It was said during one conference, where they were discussing foreign workers, the key item on the agenda was the question of how to treat the Russians. Robert Lie, as usual, was drunk, and when Lie got drunk, he was prone to speak his mind. With so much at stake, there was no room for compassion or civility. No degree of coercion was too much, and Lie expected the mine managers to back up their foreman in meting out the necessary discipline. As Lie put it, when a Russian pig has to be beaten, it would be the ordinary German worker who would have to do it. Lie remained loyal to Hitler, and he was a prominent figure in the inner circle. He was virulently anti-Semitic, and through a number of speeches and writings, he helped to communicate the need for the Holocaust, and he outright encouraged it. These public speeches encouraged the attacks against the Jews, and he was involved in meetings with Hitler, Albert Speer, Martin Bormann, and Wilhelm Keitel, in which Hitler outlined that he wished for the Jews to disappear by any means. Because of this, Lie declared outright anti-Semitic vitriol, and he was incredibly outspoken against the Jews. In one speech in December 1939, he said that if the British won the war then, the German people, man, woman and child, would be exterminated. The Jew would be wading in blood. Funeral pyres would be built on which the Jews would burn us. We want to prevent this. Hence it should be rather the Jews who fry, rather they who should burn, they who should starve, they who should be exterminated. Lie's bizarre behaviour also resulted in him becoming determined to create a death ray, and he became obsessed that this idea would change the war for the Germans. But as the war turned against them, he was by Hitler's side, and he last saw Hitler at his infamous final birthday on the 20th of April 1945 in the Führer bunker in Berlin. Lie then left for Bavaria and expected to see Hitler again, as he believed he would take up a final stand inside of the National Redoubt, or the infamous Alpine fortress. But Hitler did not leave Berlin, and Lie was at a loose end, and he was later captured by the 101st Airborne Division, whilst he was hiding inside a shoemaker's house. He was later identified, and was then placed on trial. He was transferred later to Nuremberg prison to await his trial in the Nuremberg trials, and was indicted on waging aggressive wars in violation of international law, war crimes including the mistreatment of prisoners of war or civilian populations, and also crimes against humanity, which included the murder, extermination, enslavement of civilian populations and persecution. Robert Lie was outraged at the accusation of being a war criminal, and he told a psychologist who saw him in prison that, "Stand us against the wall and shoot us, well and good, you are victors. But why should I be brought before a tribunal like a criminal?" His stammer even prevented him saying the word criminal, but he was served his indictment on the 21st of October. But Robert Lie had no intention of ever setting foot inside of the courtroom at Nuremberg. The prison was staffed by US Army officers and guards, and each day there would be a constant guard checking prison rooms to ensure that prisoners had not taken their own lives. Inside the prison were scores of war criminals, including high-ranking Nazis such as Hermann Goring, but also ex-concentration camp guards. The peepholes of the cells were checked a number of times each hour, but Robert Lie managed to take his own life. In his cell was a toilet connected with a pipe to a cistern, a bed and a table. On the 24th of October, guards rushed into his cell to find Lie strangled, fastened to the toilet pipe. He'd made a noose from tying a towel into strips, fastened it to the toilet pipe, and then taken his own life. He was one man along with Martin Bormann, who despite being indicted at the Nuremberg trials, would never face the judges, as the trials began the following month. But what would have happened to him if he had gone in fact to trial and faced the judges? It was clear that Robert Lie was involved in the use of slave labour, and also that he forced POWs to conduct hard labour, despite during wartime not being the prominent driving force behind it. Albert Speer was seen in this light, but he offered an apology, and it's unlikely that Lie would have done this, remaining indignant and devoted to Hitler. By suppressing the working classes and exploiting them for cheap work was also an example of Lie taking advantage of the German civilians and working population. But one area that is not up for debate is the fact he was virulently anti-Semitic, and for a number of speeches it was clear he was encouraging attacks against the Jewish population and was advocating the final solution. It was also clear that he knew of the final solution and what was occurring inside of the concentration camps, and for this it's hard to look past the fact he was willingly complicit in this. Because of this, it's fair to say that Lai would probably have been sentenced to death at the Nuremberg trials should he have ever arrived there, making his death sentence the missing one of Nuremberg. He truly was a despicable man who was devoted to Hitler until the very end, but he avoided justice by never appearing at the Nuremberg trials, but deciding to end his own life instead. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.